Then I'll make this place worthless.
Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Margaret Hayes unlocked the doors of Liberty Diner, a small roadside restaurant on Route 66 in Arizona. For 35 years, truck drivers, police officers, teachers, and travelers had started their day there. The diner wasn't famous for luxury. It was famous because everyone who walked through its doors felt like family. Margaret was 67, widowed, and still wore the same blue apron her late husband Tom had embroidered with the words, "Liberty Diner." Before serving her first customer, she always stepped outside, straightened the faded American flag above the roof, and whispered, "Morning, Tom." That afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of the diner was shattered as 12 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. Customers stopped eating, coffee mugs froze in midair, and everyone watched as billionaire real estate developer Damian Cole entered wearing a tailored charcoal suit. He sat at the counter as if he already owned the place, removed a leather folder from his briefcase, and slid it toward Margaret. $12 million, he said. Signed today, and this diner becomes mine. Margaret didn't even open the contract. She quietly poured him a fresh cup of coffee and smiled. "My husband built this diner with his own hands," Damian replied coldly. "Memories don't pay bills." Margaret pushed the folder back across the counter. "Neither does greed." For the first time, Damian's smile disappeared. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked around the crowded diner. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said. Margaret met his eyes without flinching. "I buried my husband, survived cancer, and rebuilt this place after a fire. You're not the scariest thing I've ever faced." Damian nodded slowly, then walked toward the exit. Before opening the door, he stopped and said one final sentence that made the entire diner fall silent. "Then I'll make sure this place becomes worthless." The convoy disappeared down the desert highway, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Waitress Lily walked over and whispered, "Do you think he'll come back?" Margaret looked at the old photographs covering the walls, pictures of soldiers, truckers, families, and the day Tom opened Liberty Diner 35 years earlier. She gently touched one of the frames and answered, "Yes, but not with another offer." Outside, the American flag continued waving above the roof, completely unaware that by sunrise, someone was coming to erase everything Tom had built. The next morning, Margaret woke before dawn to the sound of engines. At first, she thought it was another convoy of truck drivers stopping for breakfast, but when she stepped outside, her heart sank. 3 bulldozers, construction trucks, and dozens of workers had surrounded the buildings next to Liberty Diner. Yellow barriers blocked the street, and men in orange vests were already marking walls with red paint. Lily ran out of the diner in panic. "Margaret, what's happening?" Margaret looked across the road and whispered, "Damian." Within minutes, the first building collapsed. The bakery that had served the town for 40 years disappeared beneath a cloud of dust. Then the small pharmacy was demolished. The old bookstore followed. Customers stood on the sidewalk recording everything while frightened shop owners begged the construction manager to stop. Margaret marched toward him. "You can't destroy their businesses." The manager showed her a stack of permits. "Ma'am, every building here was legally purchased by Northlake Development." Margaret realized Damian hadn't come back for her diner. He had bought everything around it. By lunchtime, Liberty Diner stood completely alone in the middle of an empty construction zone. The sidewalks were closed, the parking entrance was blocked, and bright orange fencing surrounded the property on 3 sides. That afternoon, Damian returned wearing sunglasses and a confident smile. He leaned against the counter, as if nothing had happened. "Beautiful view now, isn't it?" Margaret said nothing. He placed a new contract on the counter. $12 million was yesterday. Today it's 3. Lily looked furious. "You did this on purpose," Damian calmly replied. "I improved the neighborhood." Margaret picked up the contract, folded it once, then slowly tore it into pieces. She dropped them into his coffee. "Not for 3 million. Not for 30. Damian's smile faded. "You'll lose everything." Margaret looked out the window at the destroyed buildings and answered quietly, "Maybe. But I'd rather lose a business than lose my husband's legacy." Damian walked out without another word. The following week was even worse. Some mornings only 3 customers came. Bills piled up, suppliers stopped delivering, and the town whispered that Liberty Diner wouldn't survive another month. But every evening, Before locking the doors, Margaret climbed onto the roof and raised the faded American flag one more time, completely unaware that someone was watching from the highway with a phone in his hand. Business collapsed faster than anyone expected. The construction fences kept tourists away, GPS apps marked the road as under development, and Liberty Diner slowly became invisible. Some mornings Margaret brewed 2 full pots of coffee and ended the day throwing almost all of it away. Lily quietly asked, "How much longer can we survive?" Margaret looked at the nearly empty cash register and smiled anyway. "One more day. We always survive one more day." But after closing, she sat alone in Tom's old office and opened the unpaid electricity bill. For the first time in 35 years, she wondered if Damien was right. That evening, just before sunset, Margaret climbed onto the roof carrying a folded American flag. It had become her daily ritual since Tom passed away. She carefully replaced the faded flag with a freshly stitched one and saluted it in complete silence. She didn't notice a young truck driver named Jake Wilson parked across the highway. Jake had eaten breakfast at Liberty Diner every Friday for 7 years. Watching Margaret stand alone above the empty diner, he quietly recorded a 20-second video on his phone. He uploaded it with one simple caption: "A billionaire destroyed this town to force a 67-year-old widow to sell her diner. Don't let Liberty Diner disappear." Jake went back to driving and forgot about it. The next morning, Lily rushed into the kitchen holding her phone. "Margaret, you need to see this." The video had already reached 2 million views overnight. Thousands of comments poured in from across America. Veterans wrote, "We're driving from Texas." Truckers promised to stop at Liberty Diner. Firefighters, teachers, and families shared the video with the hashtag #SaveLibertyDiner. Margaret didn't understand social media, but she understood what happened next. By 9:00 a.m., pickup trucks began filling the parking lot. By noon, the line stretched onto the highway. By evening, every table was full. Lily stood at the window with tears in her eyes. "They came." Margaret looked outside at hundreds of strangers waiting patiently for a meal. "No," she whispered. "They came for hope." Across town, Damien watched the viral video on his office television. His smile disappeared. Because the little diner he tried to make worthless had just become America's most loved restaurant. Within 72 hours, #SaveLibertyDiner became the #1 trending story in America. News helicopters circled above the tiny diner, reporters lined the sidewalk, and television crews called it the little restaurant standing against a billionaire. Margaret had never used social media in her life, yet strangers traveled hundreds of miles just to shake her hand. Veterans left handwritten notes on the walls, truck drivers paid for meals they never ate, and children dropped dollar bills into the tip jar with messages that read, "Don't sell." For the first time since Damien's attack, Liberty Diner was overflowing with customers. The same parking lot that had been empty now stretched with pickup trucks, motorcycles, and RVs as far as the highway. Lily laughed while pouring coffee. "We're serving more people than we did before the construction." Margaret smiled, but she knew Damien wouldn't stay quiet for long. She was right. That afternoon, Damien called an emergency press conference across the street. Standing beside a giant model of his luxury development, he announced, "Northlake is creating thousands of jobs for this community. Unfortunately, one business owner is standing in the way of progress." Cameras immediately turned toward Liberty Diner. Reporters rushed to Margaret asking, "Are you refusing to help the town grow?" Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and calmly answered, "Progress doesn't begin by destroying your neighbors." Her simple reply spread across every news channel. That evening, Damien watched the interviews from his penthouse office. His public image was collapsing, investors were demanding answers, and his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Furious, he ordered his legal team, "Find something. Taxes, permits, health inspections, I don't care. Shut that diner down." The next morning, 3 government inspectors arrived at Liberty Diner without warning. Customers watched nervously as they inspected the kitchen, freezers, storage room, and every document Margaret owned. Lily whispered, "He's trying to close us." Margaret kept cooking pancakes as if nothing had happened. After 2 exhausting hours, the lead inspector walked back into the dining room. Everyone held their breath. He smiled. "Mrs. Hayes?" Margaret looked up. "We've never seen a cleaner kitchen." The entire diner erupted into applause. Outside, Damien watched from his black SUV. For the first time, he realized something terrifying. The harder he attacked Liberty Diner, the stronger America stood behind it. #### Part 5. 5 days after the viral video, Liberty Diner had become a national symbol. Television hosts broadcast live from the parking lot, celebrities posted photos eating Margaret's famous apple pie, and donations poured in from every state. But while America celebrated, Damien Cole was losing millions. Investors began questioning why his luxury development had become the country's most hated project. His stock dropped nearly 18% in a single week, and the first investor officially pulled out. That afternoon, investigative journalist Emma Lewis arrived at the diner. She wasn't interested in Margaret's recipes, she wanted the truth behind Damien's company. "Mrs. Hayes?" Emma asked. "Did Damien ever threaten you before the demolition?" Margaret quietly nodded. "He said he'd make this place worthless." Emma looked toward the empty construction site surrounding the diner and smiled. "Then I think I know where to look." For the next 48 hours, Emma dug through county records, environmental permits, and property filings. Late Friday night, she discovered something shocking. The bakery and pharmacy hadn't been legally demolished at all. Damien's company had received preliminary approval, but the final environmental clearance had never been issued. The demolition had violated federal preservation laws because 2 of the buildings were registered historic landmarks. Emma published the story the next morning. Within hours, every major news network was running the same headline. "Billionaire bulldozed historic buildings without legal approval." Federal investigators immediately arrived at the construction site. Yellow tape surrounded Damien's project, heavy machinery was shut down, and workers were ordered to leave. The massive luxury development worth $600 million was frozen indefinitely. Margaret stood outside the diner watching investigators seal the site. Lily whispered, "You won." Margaret slowly shook her head. "No." She looked across the road where the destroyed bakery once stood. "Nobody wins after a town loses its neighbors." Just then, another black SUV pulled into the parking lot. This time, there were no security guards. Only Damien. And for the first time since they met, he walked into Liberty Diner without wearing a smile. Damien Cole walked into Liberty Diner without bodyguards, without cameras, and without the confidence he carried the first time. The entire restaurant became silent as he stopped in front of Margaret's counter. She poured him a cup of black coffee and placed it in front of him exactly as she had days earlier. Damien looked around at the packed dining room filled with truck drivers, families, and veterans. "You've become famous," he said quietly. Margaret smiled. "No. People just remembered what matters." Damien took a deep breath and slid another folder across the counter. "This isn't a purchase contract." Margaret opened it. Inside was a proposal to rebuild the bakery, pharmacy, and bookstore at Northlake's expense. Lily whispered, "He's actually paying for everything?" Damien nodded. "I have no choice. The investigation froze my entire project. If I don't repair the damage, my company won't survive." Margaret closed the folder without signing. Damien looked surprised. "You're refusing again?" She replied calmly. "I'm refusing because this isn't enough." The customers listened in complete silence. "You didn't just destroy buildings," Margaret continued. "You destroyed people's businesses, memories, and livelihoods. Rebuilding walls doesn't rebuild trust." Damien lowered his head for the first time. Just then, the former bakery owner, Mrs. Alvarez, walked into the diner carrying a cardboard box filled with photographs rescued from the demolished shop. She placed one picture on the counter. It showed her parents opening the bakery in 1968. "Your machines destroyed my building," she said, "but they almost erased my family." Damien couldn't speak. Margaret pushed the photograph toward him. "This is what $12 million could never buy." Damien slowly stood and faced the crowded diner. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought land created value. I forgot that communities do." Several customers remained skeptical, but nobody interrupted. Before leaving, Damien signed the reconstruction agreement in front of everyone and handed it to Margaret instead. "You choose the contractors," he said. "Not me." As he walked toward the door, Margaret called after him. "Damien." He turned around. She smiled gently. "This coffee is on the house." For the first time in his career, the billionaire realized something no business school had ever taught him. Respect is the only investment that always earns a profit.